Anuvihita,
as desired.
as desired.
Anatha,
Anatha,
helpless.
helpless.
Natha,
Natha,
O master.
O master.
Pahi,
Pahi,
just take care of.
just take care of.
Prajaha,
Prajaha,
of the subjects.
of the subjects.
Prabhu,
Prabhu,
O Lord.
O Lord.
Translation and commentary. O best among the descendants of Bharat, Yudhisthira, I maintain, therefore, that all this was within the plan of the Lord. Accepting the inconceivable plan of the Lord, you must follow it. You are now the appointed administrative head, and, my Lord, you should now take care of those subjects who are now rendered helpless. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The popular saying is that a housewife teaches the daughter-in-law by teaching the daughter. Similarly, the Lord teaches the world by teaching the devotee. The devotee does not have to learn anything new from the Lord because the Lord teaches the sincere devotee always from within. Whenever, therefore, a show is made to teach the devotee, as in the case of the teaching of Bhagavad Gita, it is for teaching the less intelligent men. A devotee's duties, therefore, is to ungrudgingly accept tribulations from the Lord as a benediction. The Pandavas were advised by Bhisma to accept the responsibility of administration without hesitation. The poor subjects were without protection due to the battle of Kurukshetra, and they were awaiting the assumption of power by Maharaj Yudhisthira. A pure devotee of the Lord accepts tribulations as favor from the Lord. Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Kauravani Pacharani Nirvishesha Shanivari Paschachari Satani Mukam Karati Vachavam Pangam Manayate Giriam Yat Kripa Tvamaham Vande Shri Guru Dinatanam Om Ayanat Mirandasya Ganangina Shalakaya Chakshur Nivatam Jaina Tasmai Shri Guru Namaha. So, Hare Krishna. This section of the Srimad Bhagavatam, first of all, when I was reading the purport, it came to me that it's actually quite appropriate for what's going on in America. That a new ruler is attempting to get into office, and so many obstacles are there. Maybe obstacles that we perceive or he perceives that shouldn't be there. But all these obstacles are arranged by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And really what I wanted to speak about today was responsibility, because responsibility is something which comes from taking on, or when we try to be independent, as we strive for independence, we get responsibility. Responsibility comes to us sometimes whether we like it or not. We all want independence. We all want freedom. We all want power. But along with those things, independence, freedom, power, comes responsibility. It starts at the very beginning, from the human form of life. The minute we're born into a human body, responsibility is there. And when there's responsibility, there's accountability. And when we have accountability, we have consequences. And those consequences may not be terribly desirable for us. We may not want them. But at the same time, they teach us things, and they make us stronger. They help us to grow in spiritual life. They help us to grow in material life as well. Prabhupada gives the example of teaching the daughter-in-law by teaching the daughter, and how we learn things by, Krishna teaches us things by what he does with his devotees, or what he does in the material world in general, sometimes not with his devotees, but just in the material world. Things happen, and if we're intelligent, we'll learn. Prabhupada says there's multiple levels of intelligence. One level of intelligence is, first level is we just learn by hearing. Second level of intelligence is we learn by experience. We have some experience, and then we say, I know, actually, second level of intelligence is I see somebody else learning from experience, and then I think, I'm not going to go there. I don't need to experience that to learn the lesson. I can learn the lesson by observation. And the third level of intelligence is that I think, well, I could probably do it better or differently and get a different result, so I try, and I get the same result. And then I realize, yes, it's actually something that shouldn't be done. And then it goes down from there. How many times you have to get kicked in the head before you realize that that activity is not a desirable activity. So here we have Maharaj Yudhisthira at the end of the Battle of Kurukshetra. And he's looking at devastation. The whole, really the whole planet, or the whole material world as we know it, is in confusion. So many people have been killed. So many people are suffering. So many people are confused. All the things basically that Arjuna predicted would happen at the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita, when he was saying that he didn't want to fight. All those things actually kind of happened, right? The senior devotees were killed, or the senior people were killed. Traditions would be challenged. Many, many ramifications would be there that would be very unpleasant for many, many people. There was a lot of rebuilding to do, restructuring. And Yudhisthira was looking at the situation and thinking, it all happened for me. Everything happened because of me. It was all happening to put me in the throne. And he felt better. I don't really want to take this position. I don't really want this responsibility. Arjuna said the same thing. I don't need a kingdom. I don't need power. I don't need wealth. I don't need a kingdom. I can go just chant Hare Krishna in the forest, no problem. And that was his reason. Why should I fight? If fighting is not a good thing, it's abominable, has so many negative ramifications. And now those negative ramifications are realized, and Yudhisthira is thinking, it was all done for me. I feel terrible, and as a austerity, as a penance, I should give it all up. I should go away from this situation. Neither of those two points of view is correct. And Krishna speaks Bhagavad Gita to convince Arjuna, and Krishna arranges for Bhisma to speak in this assembly to convince Yudhisthira. And actually, in this verse, he actually, in the purport, Prabhupada actually speaks as if Bhisma is speaking to all the Pandavas, not just Yudhisthira, that you all have responsibility for leadership. You all have the responsibility to bring the society to a better place, to right the wrongs that have been done, and to establish good leadership by your excellent example. We see this throughout in many places in the Bhagavatam. We hear about great leaders again and again who, by one system or another, had to straighten things out, had to set a good example, had to take some difficulty on their head and go forward. We read about Prithu, and for example, who had to plow the earth, threaten the earth to get her to give what was needed, and so many different situations where they're suffering to the people, and it's the job of somebody to take up that responsibility. But along with that responsibility, as I said before, comes difficulty, comes suffering, even apparent suffering. And by that suffering, we make spiritual advancement. It's purifying, it cleanses the heart, and it teaches us lessons that we can learn. We see the devotees, they feel compassion for people in general. They feel they want to make it better, and Krishna wants to make it better. So through the agency of his devotees, he arranges for different people to make it better. But sometimes in the taking of that responsibility to make it better, we find that we have to suffer. There's suffering apparently there. And by that suffering, we learn and others learn as well. We teach the general mass of people by learning, by being an example. And we see that again and again also. It starts at the very beginning of the Bhagavatam with the sages of Naimisharanya seeing the suffering of the people of Kali Yuga and thinking, we got to do something about this. We can't just let this happen. And so they decide to do a sacrifice. And then Maharaj Pariksit enters onto the scene and the Bhagavatam gets spoken. And then Narada sees this isn't the Bhagavatam as exists now, the Vedic literature as exists now. These things need to be delivered in a way that the people can hear them. And so we get Sukadev Goswami and Sutta Goswami and so many people, devotees, asking questions to give the knowledge of the Bhagavatam, the essence of the Bhagavatam, in a way that it can be understood. And Vyasadeva, of course, taking the trouble to write it all down and put it in a position where we can understand it. And Prabhupada taking the trouble to write it all down so that we can understand it. We have no qualification to understand it, but we get the mercy of the pure devotee who took so much responsibility. And Prabhupada also says, he said, I could have stayed in Vrindavan. I didn't need to come to America. There's one quote from a statement Prabhupada makes, and he says, wherever the Lakshmi is, there's going to be suffering. And so he came to America and he got lots of stuff, lots of followers, lots of wealth, but so much anxiety. And every day I hear so many problems. Every day I hear, and if I were in Vrindavan, I wouldn't have to go through any of those troubles. But I take on this responsibility willingly in order to help Krishna achieve his desired goal of bringing as many people back to Godhead as possible, to help Lord Chaitanya in his mission of making every town and village aware of Krishna consciousness. I take on this responsibility in order to follow the order of my spiritual master. And in every situation, even we may think it a very small situation, if I'm a wife, I have responsibility. And those responsibilities sometimes seem burdensome. I have to cook, I have to clean. I think one of the major learning curves that happen when Indian people move to the West, for the women in particular, is that they don't have any domestic help. And now they have to do these things for themselves, whereas previously they were all done by servants. And I know when I travel sometimes to different places, and in Singapore, this is one thing that comes up again and again. And they have a whole sphere of society which is arranged by the government to provide domestic help, because people find it difficult to do their own work. But in America, you don't have many options, because a domestic helper often costs more, gets better pay than the guy who works at the office. So the housewife has responsibility. She has to raise the children, the young children. That's a responsibility. It comes with problems. Children get sick and they cry and they need things, and mothers get bitten and punched and told they're hated, and so many different things. There's a joke that one man comes home from the office and he sees his house totally in disarray. There's stuff laying all over the place, and the kids are crying upstairs. He hears them fighting with each other. He thinks, what happened to my wife? And he walks in the house and he runs, and he's calling his wife and no one answers. And he runs up the stairs, tripping on toys and all kinds of things, and he still hears the children fighting in the corner. And he runs up and he where is my wife? And he goes into the room and he opens the door, and she's sitting there at the window, polishing her fingernails. And he said, what happened? What's going on? There's piles of dishes. The children are fighting. There's stuff all over the house. She said, well, you know how you come home every day and you tell me how difficult your day was. And then you say, and what did you do today? She said, today I didn't do it. So when we all have obligations, we have duties that we have to do. And along with those duties comes responsibilities, and along with those responsibilities come consequences. So wives have consequences, human life has consequences and responsibilities. And in this situation, Yudhisthira, he had serious responsibilities, and he also had, he knew that there was going to be difficulties, there were going to be consequences. But the fortunate thing is that when we do our work for the service of the Supreme Lord, then he takes responsibility for the consequences. We don't have to worry about the consequences. Krishna says to Arjuna, you have a right to do your duty, but you don't have a right to the results. The consequences, the results are up to me. Whereas if I take an independent position and I decide what I'm going to do based on my material desire, then I have to take the consequences. I have to take the consequences completely. And they fall on me, and I have to suffer the consequences. So by Krishna's grace, if we can do our work, whatever we do, as an offering to the Supreme Lord, then by his mercy, he arranges everything to happen just according to his plan. In another place, earlier this morning, I was reading about Sanat Kumar, the four Kumaras coming in contact with Narayan at the gates of Vaikuntha, and ultimately cursing Jaya and Vijay, and him coming, Krishna coming, Narayan coming, and taking responsibility. Took responsibility. Jaya and Vijay made a mistake, but they made a mistake in the service of the Lord. And Krishna said, well, they were working for me. I take responsibility. We see with Yamaraj, he took responsibility for the actions of the Yamadutas because they were working for him. So he took responsibility. So when we work for Krishna, then Krishna shares the responsibility. He arranges for things to get done in a way that will be beneficial for every living entity, but that beneficial arrangement may not appear to us to be beneficial. And this is why the verse before this one was spoken. Grandfather Bhisma was trying to help Yudhisthira to understand that these were all arrangements of Krishna, that all the suffering that he had undergone, all the suffering the Pandavas had undergone, the whole battle of Kurukshetra, it was all the arrangement of Krishna. And they had to just become an instrument. This is another thing that Krishna says to Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, just become an instrument. You saw all the effects in the universal form. You could see that what was going to happen in the future. These people are going to die. These people are going to move on. And for various reasons and to different situations. That's not your problem. Your problem is now just to become an instrument, to fight on my behalf, to follow my order. And in following my order, all auspiciousness will be there. And I'll take care of the result. This is Krishna's promise. So we as devotees, Prabhupada told us again and again that we have services to do. We have responsibilities. We have we should take on responsibilities. We should take on risks for Krishna, knowing that Krishna will take care of us if we do that. This program that you're using here, it has all these messages flying in my face. It's kind of distracting. So we talked a little bit about the wife's responsibility. We talked a little bit about the leader's responsibility, the devotee's responsibility. The husbands have responsibility. A man who's married, he has to take responsibility for his wife and for his family and his children. And grihastas in general, they have to take responsibility for supporting the whole society. So they take on burdens. They take on burdens. We take on burdens for the spiritual master. We take on burdens for Krishna. We take on burdens for the mercy. So the mercy of Lord Chaitanya will be distributed throughout the world. And by doing that, we make advancement. And although at times it may seem difficult for us to understand why often, as a result of what we think we're doing is the right thing, we get pain, we get suffering, we get calamity. And this is what our Bhisma was telling Yudhisthira in the verse prior to this one, that nahi yasya karichit rajan. No one knows the plans of the Lord Shri Krishna. Even though great philosophers inquire exhaustively, still they're bewildered. So don't try to understand what Krishna's plan is. Just try to understand your part in it. And even that sometimes is difficult. We have to inquire from the great devotees with Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra. We have to pray like anything to find out what we have to do in every given situation. I know when I give classes, many times this question comes up: how do I know what to do? My spiritual master is not always here. The situation is so complex, especially now we have this COVID situation. It makes our lives so much more complex. We're confused and conflicted about how to go forward. But we should understand that even working at going forward within this confusing time is a benediction to the given to us by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And we have the basics that Prabhupada has given us, the basics thing to do. That those things we don't really have to consider what to do, what not to do. We have to chant our rounds. We have to follow the 4 regular principles. We have to study, read the scriptures. We have to learn them well. We have to learn them from the platform of Gyan and move them to the platform of Vigyan by practice. And so sometimes we'll make mistakes, and Krishna will help us find our way if our desire is sincere. And that's really the crux of the matter, that Yudhisthira, he had a pure desire. His desire was to please the Supreme Lord. And Bhisma was just, it was arranged by Bhisma in a very difficult situation to deliver the information and also the strength to share with Yudhisthira the knowledge that would give him the strength to go forward in a difficult situation, which takes us to another part of Krishna's arrangement, and that's the association of devotees. By the association of great devotees, we get the strength to go forward and make sacrifices and take responsibility and be willing to handle the difficulties that come with that responsibility, because we have the association of devotees. In this situation, association of devotees is sometimes hard to get, and it leaves us a little bit weakened, often a lot weakened. Many devotees are struggling because the lack of temple life, the lack of kirtan together, the lack of ability to come together in person leaves us weak, because we need the association of devotees. We need them to tell us, to preach to us, to help us, to hold us our hand and guide us in spiritual life. So Srila Prabhupada, he offered us the supreme guidance. I often wonder, in amazement actually, as I read the Bhagavatam and I hear from many, many devotees the message of the Bhagavatam, and I read sometimes the commentaries of the previous acharyas on the Bhagavatam, and I understand that the previous acharyas were speaking to an audience that had far more qualification than the audience now. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, for example, was talking to sages, people living in the forest. Sukadeva Goswami was speaking to the sages in the forest. The 4 regular principles weren't an issue. But Prabhupada was speaking to a ragtag army. He took the responsibility to leave Vrindavan and come to America without having any knowledge whatsoever what he would find there. There was no Google, there was no GPS, there was no way that Prabhupada could really understand the depravity that he was going to run into when he came to New York City or San Francisco. It was a unique level of fallenness that Srila Prabhupada couldn't really comprehend from his position in Vrindavan. Even hearing it from the Bhagavatam and hearing it from others, it was hard for him, he said, he told us, it was hard for him to understand the level of depravity that existed in the Western world. And yet, within that, Prabhupada had the instruction of his spiritual master. He took the risk of coming to the West and taking on the responsibility of preaching, and all the austerities and all the tapasya that came along with him making the effort to give Krishna consciousness to us. So when I read Prabhupada's purports, I think in amazement how he was able to construct the philosophy of Krishna consciousness, to reiterate the philosophy of Krishna consciousness in a way that could be understood by persons who previously had no qualification. There's some purports in the Bhagavatam where Prabhupada just gives lists of names and describes who those people are. There's one not too far away from this verses where it's described who is Bhisma, who is Yudhisthira, who is Arjun, who is all the people, and there are little paragraphs where Prabhupada gives us descriptions of who they are, because we didn't know anything. Sukadeva Goswami didn't have to explain who's Bhisma Dev. He didn't have to explain who Krishna was. He didn't have to explain about what the Bhagavad Gita is. These things were known to the persons in front of him. They may have had philosophical different points of view, even misunderstandings, but the basics, they were aware. We didn't know anything. And to some extent, that may have been our qualification, because at that time, we got all our information from Srila Prabhupada, and Prabhupada gave us perfect information. But now we have the same, we're getting the information from Prabhupada, but we're also getting the information from so many other places. And we have so much opportunity if we choose to stray from Prabhupada's association and followers. We can get information that wasn't intended for our level of adhikar, that wasn't intended, or even worse, was misinterpreted and misrepresented for material gain or some material reason. So I was marveling in reading the purports, especially in my own private reading, I'm reading in the 10th canto. And if you look at the purports of Srila Prabhupada, they're very elementary in terms of the philosophy of Krishna consciousness, because he was very worried that we would enter prematurely into a pretend understanding of the relationship between Radha and Krishna, and we would fall prey to a misapplication of what was going on there in the 10th canto. And due to that, we would commit offenses. And so Prabhupada gave us the purports to the Bhagavatam, and the purports, especially to these higher principles to learn in the Bhagavatam. He gave them to us very carefully, very meticulously. He protected us. But now we can go anywhere. We can find it on Google. We can go all over the place. We can find this information distorted to the max, and we can become confused. We can become bewildered. So we have a great responsibility. I feel like I have a great responsibility. I'm sure my God brothers and God sisters and all of you who are now senior devotees in your own right, have a great responsibility to pass on the knowledge of the Srimad Bhagavatam and Krishna consciousness in a way that will perpetuate the teachings of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Srila Prabhupada into the future in a healthy way. There's much discussion about how the teachings of Srila Prabhupada need to be understood on multiple levels. And one of the all the multiple levels, or several of the multiple levels, we have to understand the context in which Prabhupada spoke and the meaning behind why he said things the way he said them. Because times change and the words we use and the way we express things changes. But Prabhupada had a particular point of view, and he had a particular message that he wanted to get across to us. He had a particular audience that he was talking to, the circumstances at a particular time. And if we don't take those into consideration when we study and we give knowledge, as well as taking into consideration the present audience and the present situation, the learning won't take place properly. So in this situation, Krishna arranged for Bhisma to speak. And he tried to speak. He was unable to convince Yudhisthira to take the responsibility. So he brought Yudhisthira and the Pandavas to Bhisma. And this particular scene that takes place in this place in the Bhagavatam is a very, very powerful scene, that you have this grandsire, this person who had lived through multiple generations, who had the benediction to die to stay alive as long as he wanted, to only die if he wanted to die, and who had postponed his departure, even though very disappointed in Duryodhana, gone through so much difficulty in his involvement with Duryodhana's rulership, with Dhritarashtra's lack of leadership, with the situation with the Pandavas, seeing them going into exile, the disrobing of Draupadi. He had been witness and disturbed to the core by so many things. And yet he was a Mahajan. He was a friend of Krishna. He was a servant of Krishna, and he wanted to do something about it. And in order to do something about it, he had a fight on the wrong side. So much tribulation Bhisma Dev had gone through. And now, in order to give him the satisfaction of seeing the Pandavas and seeing Yudhisthira rightfully positioned as the new rulers of the world, knowing in his heart that they would do a good job and that it was Krishna's arrangement, Krishna arranged for him to see the Pandavas in their full regalia as leaders, coming to him on the battlefield just before, only moments before, actually, just a few verses from now, the sun will move and Bhisma will depart. So really the time is pivotal. And he also Krishna arranged for himself to be there at Bhisma Dev's departure. So all these things are coming together in this apex arrangement that Krishna has organized here, so that Yudhisthira will take the responsibility, even though he knows it will be difficult. He will take the consequences of the situation, which really wasn't even, he wanted to take responsibility for it, but it wasn't his fault. It wasn't his fault that the situation was the way it was. It was Krishna's arrangement. And whatever fault there wasn't his fault. It was the fault of other persons who didn't understand Krishna's position. And now he's ready. By Bhisma's mercy, by Krishna's arrangement, he's ready to take that responsibility. So we have, in our situation, we have Prabhupada, who took great risks, and many, many devotees who also took great risks and still take great risks. Even recently, in this current situation, we lost some devotees because they took some risk and they became ill and they left us. Great devotees who helped thousands of people become Krishna conscious, who dedicated their lives to preaching in Prabhupada's mission. gave up their life on the battlefield. And we too have that responsibility to go forward and remain on the battlefield and give Krishna consciousness to as many people as possible, so that the difficulties of the age of Kali, the difficulties of living in this material world, can be mitigated, and people can experience the happiness that is possible by the chanting of the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra and the practice of devotional service. So I really, this section of the Bhagavatam is one of my favorite sections of the Bhagavatam, because it's such a powerful exchange that Bhisma has and that Krishna makes for Bhisma's welfare. There are so many examples in the Bhagavatam and the Chaitanya Charitamrita of other arrangements that Krishna has made for his devotees' welfare. But this one in particular, so many things come together in such a moving way. And even though we know that Yudhisthira will still undergo difficulties in the future, Arjuna will in the future still undergo difficulties. They're not over yet. It's not like now the battle's over, they have their position, everything's going to be fine. It's not going to be fine. They didn't read the end of the book, so they don't know what exactly is going to happen. But because they're thoughtful and intelligent persons, they know that in the service of the Lord there will be difficulties, and then taking responsibility will lead to them having to take on difficulties, but willingly now by Bhisma's arrangement, by Bhisma's preaching, by Krishna's arrangement, they will take on those difficulties, and they will take up the responsibility of managing the material world. Management is never fun. I was talking to some devotees the other day that when I was first a devotee, everybody wanted to be temple president. And it was considered a great honor, responsibility. Yay, I get to be temple president. You bring me the first Maha plate. And I'm now, no one wants to be temple president anymore. It's very difficult to find people. And what we find is that the same people get the weight of all the different responsibilities on their shoulders. So you've got people wearing many, many titles, many, many responsibilities. We understand that it's a difficult job, being a manager, being a leader, being an acharya, being an example for others. But that example we have to follow from our acharya, Srila Prabhupada, that he took on that responsibility, and he carried a lot of weight, and he suffered a great deal in order to give us Krishna consciousness. And to repay that debt is not possible, but at least we can make an effort to repay that debt by doing the most we can to bring as many people to Krishna's lotus feet. Now, I was told that I'm supposed to leave 15 minutes for discussion and questions and answers or whatever. And so I would like to ask if there's any reflections or there's any comments or tomatoes that want to be thrown, or criticism or whatever. We have 11 minutes left. Hare Krishna.
Hello, can you hear us?
I can hear you.
Okay.
I can't hear us, but I always speak in the plural. So yes, I can hear you and the super soul within your heart. Yes, go ahead.
Yes, and also I have multiple. I'm using one of my 3 or 4 principal personalities right now.
Acha, okay.
Yeah, Tom Brown. Okay, he's also here.
Okay, well, let's go for it.
It becomes more and more useful over the internet, because you can talk in different voices, and people think that different people are there.
But I have this little flashing HR in front of me, which tells me that I'm talking to Your Grace.
Yeah, but you don't know how many people are in the room, do you?
No.
Hare Krishna, Laksmimoni, this is Tom Brown. Yeah, shut up. It's me talking. Yeah. No, this is the Hanuman Laksmimoni. He's crazy. up. I'm not crazy.
It's so challenging speaking like this, but go ahead.
Okay.
Tell me what you want to tell me. In your voice, please.
I had to, in my voice, that's a very ontological question. Wow. I had to, I had to actually log off and log back in because the whole thing jammed.
And
I'm using a cell phone, so it breaks down if I try and lose everything. So it's very, 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 very inspiring. Do you know Bhadra, Devi Dasi? She was at the Bhaktivedanta College. I don't know if she's still there or not in Bangladesh.
Yes, I know Mother Bhadra. Yes, I know. Jaya Bhadra, her name is. Yes, I know her.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So she was there with the whole Mother's Party with, Jivananda before Hansa did their thing. Okay.
Mother Pajapali time.
Yeah, we were initiated. I was, Jivadas was initiated in the same letter I was initiated from Prabhupada. And they sent the name back off as Huber Robinson, my name, 4 or 5 more devotees, and Jamie, because his name was James. So Prabhupada gave him the name of a woman, and they said, "Oh, no, he's not a woman," Okay, gave him the name, But in the end, he was involved with this Mother's Party. We won't go into details here. But there were like 18 mothers, and the big collecting program going on, everything else. So I was a brahmachari, so I was my own orbit with my services and everything else, and had some contact with, with her and other ladies in the temple, and seeing what was going on and stuff, and we're all living through the same thing. And maybe about 20 years later, then I came in contact with her again at the Bhaktivedanta College.
Yeah.
And it was so amazing talking about this, because we were looking at each other. Okay, I'd stuck with it, following my line, and my Varna Ashram system and everything else, my duties. And she stuck with it, following her line, So it's very interesting to see what the result was of somebody in her ashram, her situation, following it, and somebody in my situation. It was very instructive, seeing from the different perspective. And what is it? Teresa of Avila. She sent to Teresa of Avila.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. When I'm reading that thing and starting off, it seems like she's a jolly, reader. She'd be kind of like a jolly older monk, talking kind of joking, friendly, But at the same time, too, you don't mess with her. You don't get out of line. You don't get out of line with her. I mean, she knows her position very well. She's very powerful, but she's also, part of that power is exactly because, she's submissive, she's feminine, and everything else, and that's okay. So I was seeing that with Jaya Bhadra, and she was very, very powerful personality, and I could see more powerful than I am. But it was understanding her dharma, her position. That's one point. The other thing is very, very nice theme you're talking about, taking responsibility. And I was looking at text number 32 in light of the Bhagavat, and it shows this this Tao monk with his spaghetti type robe and Ekadanta walking along, and there's a crane down below going, which I think he's kind of saying, get a job, So it says, the verse translated says, the beautiful white clouds, freed from all burdens of water distribution, float in midair like mendicants, free from all family responsibilities. And these are this is our main outreach tool, right, of the Bhagavat. We have a whole symposium on it and everything else.
Nice.
Prabhupada says, as long as one is attached to the so-called responsibilities of family burdens, he is always full of cares and anxieties about meeting his family expenses. And of course, this exactly means that ladies also. The 4 orders of social life as designed in the Varna Ashram system are very scientific and cooperative. In student life, one is taught basic principles. Householder can execute the duties of family life responsibly. And after 50 years of age, the householder retires from family life and prepares for sannyas. The householder is duty bound to maintain the members of all the 3 other ashrams. In this way, everybody has a chance in the end to retire for a higher order of spiritual culture. Okay? The householder neglected no one. I'm kind of skipping ahead here. In the Kali Yuga, the whole system is a big mess. Prabhupada goes on, and he says, but that does not mean that there is no reality in these ashrams. One should not conclude that there is no good money simply because he met counterfeit money. The sannyashram is meant for complete freedom from all anxieties. It is meant for uplifting the fallen souls who are merged in materialism. But unless the sannyasi is free from all cares and anxieties, like a white cloud, it is difficult for him to do anything good for society. So that's making that contrast, and eventually Yudhishthira will show us that, that they'll actually take
right.
the
And last till we leave, all of them will. I was thinking when you were talking about Jai Bhadra Prabhu that we all wind up in the same place. If we follow Krishna consciousness, if we practice, if we're sincere, if we follow Prabhupada's instruction, and we take shelter of our spiritual instructors, then we all wind up in the same place. We may go by different routes, and we might not even necessarily know what route we're going to, what obstacles we're going to run in on the path. But if we continue to go forward, we'll all wind up at Krishna's lotus feet. We all wind up, like Prabhupada said, in that great ISKCON in the spiritual world. I'm not sure how you feel about that, but it's a fact that we go how we go, but we wind up detached from the material world and fixed at Krishna's lotus feet if we do it right.
And before we even that, we'll all end up as a bunch of ashes.
Well, that's the different we. That's a different part of us. That's material body ends up as ashes.
It's the same thing. Old men, old women, old black people, old white people.
Right. On material level, we also all end up in the same place, no matter how we get there, whether we're rich, whether we're poor, whether we're famous, infamous, whatever we are, at the end, the body ends up in the same place. And if the soul is realizes the relationship with Krishna, the soul ends up in the right place also. So thank you.
We all come in as toothless suckers, and we all go out as toothless suckers.
Yeah, and
on that note,
with a lot of bruises along the way.
Buddhists say we make everything complicated in between. Okay, I'll leave now. Some more intelligent people can make comments and ask questions. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Maharaj. Thank you. It's funny, when I was speaking to you, when you were speaking to me, I got a little sign on my screen and it said Hanuman Peshak Swami just left. And there you were speaking. So you do have a dual personalities. Anybody else have anything?
I'm the real Hanuman Peshak Swami. Help!
Anybody else have anything to say? Speak now or forever hold your peace. You have 2 minutes. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Mother Laksmimoni. Please accept my humble obeisance.
Mine, all glories to Prabhupada. So nice to see you or hear you or whatever.
Thank you very much for this wonderful class. I have one question, Mataji. So it seems Krishna has gone through this elaborate plan to put Maharaj Yudhishthira on the throne, but it seems he wasn't there for too long. It seems, So how do we understand the Kali Yuga has ended quickly and even Maharaja Parikshit has to leave soon? So all this, this big drama that has happened, how do we understand the benefit out of it? What exactly is Krishna teaching? Yeah.
Well, I can't predicate Krishna's mind. I'm sure he has many lessons to teach, but the ones that are perceivable by me are, for one, Kali Yuga had to come. It couldn't be held off any longer. And in order for all the things that had to happen, in other words, first we had Parikshit. Parikshit had to hear the Bhagavatam and get out of the way so Kali Yuga could come. Yudhishthira had to get out of the way so Parikshit could come, etc., etc., etc. Everybody it's a cycle. It's going on, and it has to keep going on, right? Because the next generation, the next thing has to, when you read the 8th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, you just hear one generation after another, a generation after another generation. It's a 9th canto and another generation, this king and this king and this king, and everybody comes and everybody goes. So there's progression that has to happen, and Krishna arranges by that cycle to bring us forward to do our part, our duty. Arjuna had to fight in the battle of Kurukshetra. But then as was being referred to later on, he couldn't fight anybody. He couldn't even fight the dacoits. And then Yudhisthira also, he got the society back into function. He raised, Parikshit, so Parikshit could take the responsibility of the throne. And then I'm out of here. My responsibility in this material sphere is over. And now I have that responsibility anyway. Now I have a different responsibility. I have to go and perfect my life so that I can go back to Godhead in an appropriate manner, fix my mind, fix my consciousness. So everything has its place and nothing is eternal. And some things are more temporary than others, but still everything has a purpose. There was a purpose to that small, apparently short reign of Yudhisthira Maharaj, and that he held the position, put the society back together so that Maharaj Parikshit could come into place. And one might ask the same question about Parikshit Maharaj. He was a very young man. He was just starting his reign. He was virile, he was strong, he was qualified, he had everything about him said, yes, I can do this. And then he was cursed to die in 7 days by some young whippersnapper who lost his temper. So why? Why? Because that was Krishna's arrangement. Kali Yuga had to come. It's the cycle. It goes on, marches on, time marches on.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mother Laksmimoni. That was wonderful. Actually, you emphasized what you have told in the class, that doing the duty. And I also remember Guru Maharaj, Hanumat Preshak Maharaj's point that there is no small role to play. And all of them played such a perfect role, even though the duration was small. It was such wonderful examples of Maharaj Yudhishthira and Maharaj Parikshit in doing their duties. I really like how you answered it by using the theme of the class. Thank you very much.
Hare Krishna, thank you for Hare Krishna. Anybody else? Our time is just about up. Okay, then I will sign
There's
off.
something in the chat. There's something in the chat. Sundari Radhika, would you like to read?
Okay, I'm going to open it up. I'm looking. Just obeisances, it looks like. How do we convince individuals who are new to Krishna consciousness to take up the responsibility of taking initiation? First of all, if they're new to Krishna consciousness, they're not ready to take on that responsibility. A person who's new to Krishna consciousness has to come to the point of feeling ready to take on that responsibility, because it's a voluntary vow. And if it isn't voluntary, it won't last. It'll be ephemeral. So we need to convince somebody that the goal of human life is to become Krishna conscious, and that they cannot do it on their own, that they need an instructor or even multiple instructors, but at least they need one primary instructor, and they need to be connected to the disciplic succession. So we gradually convince them, but there are stages, right? The first stage is to build some faith, shraddha, and then from shraddha, bhajana kriya, let them practice, let them start to chant, let them associate with devotees, sadhu sangha, and let them build in themselves the resolve to be willing to take up the responsibility of perfecting their life and going back to Godhead. Then they'll come to the realization that they can't do it on their own. Just like Arjuna came to the realization, I can't figure this out on my own. I need a spiritual master. And then he surrendered. So surrender is a voluntary thing, and it's not something you're going to convince somebody to do. It's something that they will come to do if you can give them sufficient faith to practice, to take up the practice. I hope that's okay. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Mother Laksmimoni.
Hare Krishna. It was you that asked that question?
Yes, Mother Laksmimoni. I put it in the chat.
Yeah, I see it in the chat, but I see you talking to me now in front of me. Hare Krishna. Thank you for being present in front of me. I appreciate it. Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much. It was a wonderful class.
Hare Krishna. Okay, devotees, so I'm going to depart now and get on with my day. All glories to Srila Prabhupada, and I thank you all for coming and listening to me. Haribol. And now I don't know how to get out of that. Jai Haribol. Hare Krishna. Haribol. Haribol. Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much, Mother Lakshmi.
Hare Krishna.